Welcome, everyone, to Office Hours, where we answer your tech and media production questions every day. Alexander, what do we have on the list for today?
First one this morning is from the QR code. Reina Doppelpavlis in Sequoia is asking, Jonas said, I don't talk about those. Does this mean he never talks about hybrids at all, or just hybrids of these? It was very confusing to hear, so please explain more.
We're lucky Jonas is here. So, Jonas, explain,
I
please.
think that is in response to when I was talking about the article I wrote about the different types of productions. I found that too often people dive into hybrids when explaining something, and that prevents you from having a clear picture. Like if you, in this case, we were talking about the difference of on-site, remote-controlled, RAMI, and distributed production. If I would have said, well, actually, none of this is how it happens in reality, and you always have one person here, one person there, it's a lot more confusing. I like to start with a clean, separated approach, and then, to be honest, hybrid is where reality sets in. You always think you do a clean thing, and then there's this one aspect that makes it a hybrid. So I wouldn't say that I'll never talk about them, but I try to limit the scope of that explanation to not include hybrids. And I often find that it's easier to think about production if you separate your concerns per location. So like if I need to do a hybrid, I talk about an interface between the two worlds. Like this is how we get a multi-view, this is the control, this is the audio, this is the video ISOs we get. But I don't like see it as a whole big picture, because that way you can separate it, have different concerns. That's probably how I would say it. That being said, can guarantee your hybrid is where life sets in. So that is on my chopping block of writing something on how to tackle hybrids, because I think it's a common issue and a common problem that we run into is that it's not as clear as I lined it out there.
You know, this has come up so fast since the pandemic and everybody flooding to online something or other. Is there a standards? I guess there's no standards organization for the nomenclature for all of this remote production. And so it's just kind of growing up. What are the sources that you trust, Jonas? And is there differences in Europe and America like we've seen in other parts of technology?
I don't think there's a easy standards organization anymore. Like during COVID, things developed too fast for standards organization. Like even with WebRTC and WIP, we see that, or like MOQ, Media Over Quick, we see that standards organizations are heavily important. Because like this is how we work, this is how we communicate with each other, this is how we do interconnects. But most of the time, like if you're just a little bit ahead of them, then you realize that reality and standards are often different. Like even with something like 702110, you see that, yeah, they're kind of like in this spec, but also they're like this one thing they like read differently. So there's also still an interpretation there of those specs. And to be honest, the explanation I've gave is not from me. There's like multiple different people that have like worked on that type of like diagram. So I try, and I'm kind of over like trying to find other people defining it because it's not happening. So I was like, here, this is it. If you want to work with me, just take the 5 minutes, read it, and then you know what I mean. Because most of the time, there isn't a clear differentiation. Like I've heard cloud, distributed, remote, RAMI, virtual thrown around, and probably the worst one is virtual. Because if you search for virtual production, what I mean is, like in the cloud with Zoom or like all that, a virtual event. But then you suddenly find people that are so heavy on site and mean that you have like a screen behind you and do like virtual production everywhere. And you're like, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to separate those two?
I remember being astonished when even in the production regular like grippage, the East Coast people were calling something one thing, and the West Coast people, like a light or something, it's a redhead over there and something else over there. And if you're not in that particular community, your language is different from others. And that's always very difficult for getting things ahead. Well, thank you for the perspective on that. I just thought this is... Go ahead.
We probably could do a whole segment at the start of each show that is like, how do you call an engineer in charge, director, TD? What do you call the room where the director on his switcher board sits and hits the buttons, like from gallery to, in German, we call it Regie, to like production room. I've heard everything. But the coolest thing I like is in Britain, in the UK especially, they have guarantees. And like, I think that's a job. So like there's a truck, not a truck engineer, there's a truck guarantee. And that person is there to guarantee the truck is working. He knows everything about it and all that. And we've adopted that now because I think it's a really nice way to communicate quickly and easily what you're there for. And like clients accept a lot more that is the person that I want to like be sitting around and be bored on their phone, because then everything is running well. But they're my guarantee that if it's not running well, they'll make sure it does.
I remember going across director of photography in the U.S., lighting cameraman in England and other places that I worked with. And then you got to the point where all of these inexpensive guys out there were saying, well, I'm the DP for this. And you're going, you haven't studied lenses and cinematography forever. And so there's just this malleability of language and who calls what. Fascinating thing. I don't think we're ever going to get entirely over it. But thank you, Jonas, for the perspective on that. Let's go to our next question.
This one's from Douglas Carmichael. The alt-rock band Beartooth is touring with a pair of Allen & He dLive systems, and the lead singer is mixing in-ear monitors from the stage. Wouldn't seeing mixing IEMs be too much cognitive load, considering the need for mon mixers to respond to the talent?
Alexander Knight, what do you think?
Not really. I mean, it's more work. It's less than ideal. But the reality, Douglas, is that a lot of bands simply don't have the budget for that. I mean, I know a lot of bands that actually have decent followings that are touring right now that are, they're lucky to have a front of house engineer, but they just don't have the budget to pay the salary for a dedicated, monitor mixer. So, if you have the means, I mean, they have two dLive consoles. Those are expensive consoles. So they're lucky that they have another console and that they have somebody in the band that has the knowledge to actually run it, which from a lot of the bands that I've met, a lot of the people in these bands don't have a lot of technical knowledge. So if you know how to do it, you're already on the stage, you know what you want, you can easily mix that. And a lot of times you can just have a tablet set up on a mic stand and you can, do your mix right there. So, sometimes it's just necessity rather than you want to actually do it.
Ronnie Hofsoy.
I think most bands routing with their own IEMs, it's probably just preset at what they normally use. So they have dialed this in during sound checks or training sessions before they go on tour. So it's just probably just minor changes to the mix, and mixing IEMs is not as advanced as mixing load monitors or wedges on the stage itself. So it could be dialed more in and be more adjusted before they go on stage. So I think, as Alexander just said, it's a necessity, and I think it's becoming easier and easier to mix your own IEMs in the coming years as well.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, Ronnie got it right there. It is easier right now. And, one of the most frustrating things that a performer can have on stage is trying to get the monitor mixer person off stage to pay attention to them, to cue them to bring up me in the IEMs. And bring up me, does that mean bring my guitar up, bring my mic up? You have to communicate all that silently while you're singing. That's a little hard. But if you have an iPad on your mic stand there, you can just kind of casually reach down and crank up your own vocal track if you can't hear yourself well enough in your IEMs. And you don't have to worry about feedback or any of the other problems you have to do with wedges with a separate monitor mixer. So I think it has kind of revolutionized the in-ear monitor mixing. And a lot of these people, even if you don't see the iPads or the iPhones or the tablet on the mic stand, during the mic check, they will preset all their mixes for each individual song, and they can be loaded and gone to as a preset for each song. So depending upon whether that person has a lead or a solo or whatever singing backgrounds, you can adjust your in-ear monitors for whatever song and whatever part you're singing or playing. And then just load it in for that particular show. And that works a lot better than trying to do it live during the show.
I wonder whether somebody is working on a foldback that allows an individual musician to adjust their signal versus the mix in their in-ear monitors. That would be a great way to get rid of this problem and let the actual player determine how loud they are against the feed. Probably somebody has done that. It seems like such an obvious idea. Let's go to the next question.
Angela Jack in Brooklyn, New York is asking, hello, Office Hours. Does anyone in the community have experience with this HDMI cable setup? Would love to get OH's insights. Would you ever trust this in a production? It looks like it's an optical fiber cable from Ruprio.
Oh, optical fiber. Ronnie Hopsway, have you looked into this?
Not exactly this specific product. We've used a lot of different types of strategies for getting an HDMI signal into something else and then transport it for a long distance. I would say as much as a cheap HDMI cable, which is one way and often get really, really abused on the road, is probably not the thing I would do. Most of these cables are perfectly okay in a home theater or in a more, let's say, fixed production. But having it as a temporary solution or temporary cables that are being used all the time, I would not go that way. They are flimsy. They are not as rugged as you should wish they were. But as to this product specifically, I'm not sure. It seems to be a little bit more professional, but still, you have the cable and it can get hurt, etc. So you have at least to be very careful with it. We have lots of HDMI fiber cables, and we tend to call them a one-off. You use them for one time and then you throw them away because they are so flimsy. A better way to do this would probably be to use something like a Blackmagic mini converter or micro converter, which actually does this in another way. You have a big box which you can put on the floor under the camera. You have it's separate power for it. It has more cooling. Most of these fiber HDMI adapters getting a good temperature when they are being used. And the other thing you can use with the Blackmagic converter is you can have it two-way. So you can have a return signal coming back to you where your camera position is. And of course, you can have different lengths of the cable as well. So this is a big discussion, and I think I have to say it depends. I'm not sure I would use such a product in a production.
Our favorite answer on Office Hours. Courtney Gooden, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Ronnie. These optical cables, and this particular one uses multiple connectors. So he's got these send and receive units that have the HDMI on it, and then you plug the optical cable into this. So this is a point of failure here. If you get any dirt in any of these connectors here between the optical cable and the transcoder that's in here that changes it from electrical to optical. Plus, you got to power one side of it, and this one has a USB A. I mean, it looks like an old USB micro connector to standard A connector. So you got to have that plugged into a power supply, and if that power supply fails, then your link goes down. I kind of prefer, if you are going to use optical HDMI extender, to have one where the optical cable is hardwired into the electronics that are in the shells to begin with. And if they generally pull more current than HDMI can deliver, so that's a problem if they don't have a separate power supply, because depending upon what you plug them into, there may not be enough current to run them properly. And as Ronnie said, that cable is fairly sensitive to being crimped or, turning around a corner or run over with steel wheels. And so you're going to have to replace it anyway. So, this might give you the ability to replace just the optical link between the two without having to pay for the little transceivers. But, I don't know how much money you're going to save anyway for replacing that cable often. I'd just go with SDI, conversion of HDMI to SDI and send it over coax cable, which you can extend or shorten or make whatever length you need to.
Jonas Dottle.
A couple things to consider here is most cheaper HDMI over fiber solutions are like Courtney said, where you can't replace the fiber cable. A couple of things to keep in mind with that is the most likely breakage is that fiber cable. Also, now you have a bulky head again, so that might be hard to pass through any openings or anything that you have like that. So while I do appreciate that this one has a detachable fiber cable, it does look to be proprietary or at least not super standard connector. So I would be a little careful of that. The other thing to keep in mind is if you just look at their product page, it only works for a 300-meter run, which makes me question the power level that you will have on that fiber. I think this might be a good, I know a couple of people that use like the cheap HDMI to over fiber cables, and they're happy. Keep in mind they are directional most of the time. That being said, if I need to stream 8K over something like this, I would probably want, and like they show it in a home theater use for professional live streaming or even broadcast use. What you have is you have a converter that takes the signal and converts it to SDI. For a single signal, you should only need one fiber. With HDMI, sometimes, because like technically HDMI is bidirectional communication as well. But there's like a lot of things that you want to be able to set that. You want to be able to set the EDIT, so like the devices handshake correctly. Do you need to worry about HDCP and all that? And if you end up going down this route, keep in mind, now you're in the fiberland. Welcome to fiberland. Things to be aware of. Your fiber is probably cheaper than buying copper cables, but the converters are the expensive thing. You need a cleaning little stick that's a push cleaner. You push it into the connector, and then that cleans the fiber ends. Make sure that you cap them. And then also what's really important for things like this is have converters there, especially if you're in a larger venue like a stadium. They most likely have fiber that you're allowed to use because they don't want you to run your fiber everywhere. And that's fiber is a good bit more solid now than most people think, especially TAC fiber. That stands for tactical fiber, where it's armored, which you most likely will find in broadcast, like a TAC 10, where you have 10 single fibers in there. Those are a lot more stable than you would think, and then the long runs are mostly provided by the venue. So you need just a visual fault indicator, a laser, and a power meter to make sure you know if it's clean. And all of those are things where I'm like, do you really want to go into this? If yes, and you just want a cheap one, just buy a cheap one and be aware that you probably have to replace it. Otherwise, buy proper boxes and do it the proper way. There's a lot of, I could talk about fiber for hours. There's a lot of tools that you want, and then you want to have the proper etiquette and everything. So it's not as simple as, oh yeah, we'll just use fiber cables if you want to do it professionally.
Alexander.
Not much to add to that, but just specifically to that brand, I haven't personally used it, but I know Guy Cochran, who's part of the community and has been on the panel many times, has talked about this specific one, and he's mentioned he's had pretty good luck with it. So you may want to reach out to him and see if check in and see if his cables are still working. I know James Haldane in the chat has had a lot of problems with these, so your mileage may vary. I've had some good experience with HDMI to Ethernet converters, and those ones are fairly inexpensive. Although I know some people have mentioned they've had some EDID issues. So there's all sorts of weird quirks with HDMI.
Yeah, there is a robust chat in the Mukana interface for those of you who have not been part of that. If you follow along from officehours.global/join, you can get yourself into the Mukana thing, and there's a robust chat that takes place where everybody are chatting about, they're chatting live about what we're chatting about here. It's a great way to enjoy and participate in a little more of Office Hours. Let's go on to the next question.
This one is from Kenzo Castanini in Cape Town. Updated H2R graphics. It keeps saying timeout, error, stopped after 5 seconds in BFocus. It has also stopped updating lower thirds, which relies on name of participant in ZoomISO. Now ISO attendee, try use lower thirds, and it stays on previous attendee name.
Good job of reading through that. Jonas, do you have things you want to address in there?
For anyone who doesn't know specifically the setup is going to be wildly confused right now. I helped Hasmo create that setup, and basically what it does is to have ZoomISO or OSC sending data to BFocus Companion, and then Companion talks to HDR Graphics. A couple things to make sure there is, if you update HDR Graphics, make sure that you select the right network address again. By default, it might be only 127.0.0.1, which is your local LAN. So at that point, it's not exposing the web server outside, and Companion wouldn't be able to connect. Make sure you set that to an external IP address. Then make sure that the IP address is still the same, and then you might also need to update BFocus Companion. BFocus Companion at this point doesn't have a great way to just update one module, so you probably need to update the whole thing. So the modules are on the same level. And then make sure in the trigger area, since they did a bunch of updates, make sure in the trigger area there's still a watcher for that specific custom variable name. And then that sends it to HDR Graphics. That being said, most likely you probably are using a generic HTTP sender for that, because I don't know if the HDR Graphics module can use variables. And the last thing I would check is make sure that ZoomOSC or ISO, whatever you're using, that the scope is set correctly. Sometimes it's set to none, sometimes it's set to all, or panelists or attendees. And then also make sure that in the log of that module, if you go into Companion, you can go into the log of that module. You should see the messages being sent, and maybe they just changed that custom variable.
If I was starting my career again, I would definitely take a networking course as one of my first steps and before you get into production, because there's so much of this is going in this area. But thank you, Jonas, and thank you, Kenzo, for the question. We appreciate it. Next question.
From the QR code, Francis Fry in Cambridge, Massachusetts. How do you recommend I transfer 0.5 terabyte of data, 5 files, 100 megabytes each, to someone several states away?
Ronnie Hofsoy is going to help you. Ronnie?
I don't know if several states have something to do with this, but I would, regardless of the number of states the data should be traveling, I would probably not transfer it manually by train, especially not in new states. I would probably use an internet service like WeTransfer. If this is a one-off transfer that's only going to be done one time to this specific recipient, probably use WeTransfer for that. If this is something going on more regularly, probably something like Dropbox or Box or similar. At least if it needs some structure to the storage where you control how that looks on the other side. But the easiest one is WeTransfer. It's quick, it's reliable, we have never had problems, and you can even use it on different types of OSs and phones and iPads as well. So perfect product.
Jonas Stadel.
Well, I love WeTransfer if we're actually talking about 0.5 terabyte and you're mostly concerned about your cost. WeTransfer has additional limits. Make sure that you get a monthly one if it's just like a single time that you need to use it. Otherwise, I hate that method. And if you have internet issues where you can't upload it fast enough to somewhere, or the recipient can't download it fast enough, just buy a little like SanDisk SSD. Make sure it's an SSD, nothing that like has moving parts in it. Make sure it's a little bit larger than probably just get a 1 terabyte one. Pad it well, send it over to them. If it's a client, congrats, you can invoice them for another, $70-$80 or something. Keep that in mind. Otherwise, WeTransfer is a great alternative, or I would use something like S3 or R2 from Cloudflare for transferring. Or if you want something more customer focused, just sign up to Frame.io for a month, upload it there, and then download it somewhere else. And keep in mind, if it's something important that nobody else can get, while you transfer it, maybe zip it up and put a password on it or encrypt it, depending on what your regulations on that is. If you want to be really geeky, you could. I'm not saying you should do that. There's a really geeky way where you can use SLT to transmit the file, because there's a file transmit mode, and you could send it over SRT.
Ooh, back channel. How exciting. Let's, Courtney wanted to get into this. Courtney?
Yeah, I agree with both Ronnie and Jonas. I think a lot of times the easiest way, and I think there's a typo in there, they meant 100 gigabytes each. If they have 500 gigabytes, that's half a terabyte. So with a single file that's 100 gigabytes, one loss in there that is uncorrectable or unrecoverable by the transfer software, and that blows that whole file, or it could have to restart transmission on that file. It could take a long time to transfer these files, but depending upon the speed of your upload link and the download link of the person you're sending it to, or if you're sending it through an intermediary like Frame.io, where it's going up into the cloud and then going down to the other person, that adds additional delay in there depending upon the connection speed. And a lot of times just sending it FedEx overnight on an NVMe drive that is insured is probably the fastest and safest way to get that amount of data over there by the next morning. So, and probably cheaper than signing up for a Frame.io account for a month, maybe.
Let's go to our next question.
David Brady in New York City, New York. What's all the hubbub with Sequoia? I'm running 15.2 with full Rogue Amoeba suite with 0 issues. What are the problems people are so wary about?
Nigel, do you want to hop in on this?
Yeah, I think my lagging indicator is always Dante and virtual sound. And when that's working, then I start looking at everything else, because that's often the long pole in the tent, or whatever the right expression is. Rogue Amoeba is actually normally pretty quick. The products that I think that are left outstanding to move across are very industry vertical. You might find some of your 3D type modeling things that use unusual algorithms are struggling. So I think that's from the audio side. I think when Dante is ready, I go start testing on my production machines. I think the other side of it is that people are very frustrated about is in the new version, there are so many permissions and there are so many requests, and Apple is trying to protect ourselves from ourselves so much that if you're a sophisticated user, it feels like it's slowing you down. But I've moved across everything now, and I'm generally fine.
Ronnie Hossoy.
Well, a problem has been for a long time. I don't know from what version. Earlier, we had a lot of trouble with core audio crashing, as Mickey says in the chat as well. I've had numerous discussions with both Mickey and other personnel regarding the instability and inability to pinpoint exactly what's going on, except that the core audio is crashing. And core audio is a part of the operating system, which is developed by Apple, and it has been really hard to get a kind of explanation of what is going on and what's causing this. As to the newest versions, it seems to be a little bit more stable. It has been another trouble. I have this setup where we use Rogue Amoeba's software to route audio from virtual devices. For instance, the intercom system is going into the earpieces. And when I started to do that, it didn't crash the core audio. It just didn't work. So virtual devices and how you use it could cause some problems. And then again, we had some other people doing this. I can't remember if it was Alexander or that has actually just restarted a lot of times, and then it suddenly just worked. So the problem is the hubbub. As you said, the hubbub is that you can't rely on that, and sometimes it's working perfectly, and suddenly it doesn't, and that's the big problem for me at least.
Yeah, it seems like configurations always have something to do with these kind of things, because almost everybody here on this panel are deeply technical, capable, but people who push software very hard. They have big shows and big stresses on everything working right. I know I'm just an individual guy. I don't do a lot of audio work, but I do audiobooks, and so I'm constantly in the audio side of things. And my updates have all been flawless, but that's me as an individual not pushing something and doing one set of operations. And so the fact that it's stable for me is not going to necessarily translate to some people like those on our panel who have very complex needs and deal with lots of people and lots of different systems. So it's one of those things, keep your eyes on the chatter. I always remember Apple has been reasonably good, although we are hearing that if these are core audio and core video and the other core services inside the Apple API, maybe there's something going on, particularly with all the security lockdowns Apple has been pushing out to make their systems as clean as possible. You sometimes got to keep your fingers crossed and watch the boards and talk a lot of people, and hopefully they'll settle it all out and another rev will come through. I've had this happen a lot. Something's giving me problems and another rev comes out, an incremental upgrade, and suddenly those problems disappear and I forget about them. So fingers crossed for you. Thanks for the question, David. Let's move on to our next question.
This one's from the QR code. Steve Uroff in Madison, Wisconsin. Want to add a third mirror display to a conference room. Simplest way would be by adding a second HDMI splitter in the video path before the existing one. Can HDMI splitters be chained reliably, and are there buy once, cry once brands to consider?
Ronnie Hofsway's coming back in. Ronnie?
I would not use a HDMI splitter personally. We tend to use SDI for these loops, which we call them. So we have the signal going to SDI first. Then we use Blackmagic's microconverters that are actually just SDI to HDMI outputs, converting from SDI to HDMI, going up to the display. And then it has a loop out on the same box that we relay to the next display, and so on and so on and so on. There is a slight delay on this processing, so you would be in the chain of many displays. I don't think you would see this in just 3 displays. And that's the way I would do it. Being reliable on all the issues that can arise when using HDMI, I wouldn't trust that. It could be working fine and then suddenly it doesn't work anymore. So SDI is the way to go for me at least.
Courtney?
Yeah, I kind of agree there. There are splitters that do 1 in, 4 out, for example, so you wouldn't have to go through 2 serial ones as long as the second or third display is all within the distance of the maximum length of an HDMI cable. If you want to go from one daisy chain, in other words, from one to the next, and you said 3D third mirrored display, I assume you're not meaning mirrored left-right, but just duplicate down the line. I would go with, of course, our old friend, the MDHX on the head end that can take the HDMI in, and it gives you 4 SDI outputs on that. And then on the downstream monitors, then you can just go to the MDLX, which is a cheaper $100 SDI with loop through on one end to HDMI on the other end, and that will get you to each monitor downstream. So that would be probably the best way to go. And that way you don't have to worry about the length of cables to get to those second and third monitors, because if you get longer than about 30 feet, HDMI is not going to be your friend as long as you're staying with copper.
Jonas?
There's a couple things to keep in mind here. One, when you're leaving HDMI for SDI, keep in mind that you're now bound to any resolutions SDI can transmit. HDMI is a lot more versatile in resolutions, refresh rates, all of that. So keep that in mind. That might cause some issues with some displays that like a lot of us have seen with the A2 Mini at the start. Edit management, it's a little type of file that your display and whatever you attach communicate with, what they can do over. That becomes really important. So if the third screen is different, then make sure that you go to a certain joint one that both can do. If you actually want to keep it in HDMI because you have a weird resolution or something else, yeah, Amazon has a bunch of cheap HDMI splitters, but they are exactly what they are, a bunch of cheap HDMI splitters of Amazon. If you want something higher quality, there is a whole industry for those type of things that as events people we don't know about as much. If you go into the LED world, there's a lot more DisplayPort and HDMI use that most on this panel would want to believe. Look at Lightwear or Bluestream. Those are two relatively reputable brands for splitters. You're probably going to pay like $100 to $500 for a splitter, depending on what all it also can do. But then you have this, it will be really reliable. Make sure that you, the edit management, like I said, you will have issues having one 4K and one 1080p display, because then it depends on which one negotiates the edit. So keep all of that in mind. Test it with a couple devices, and come back to us if you have any issues with it.
Alexander?
Yeah, so I am not a fan of HDMI splitters here, but I do like HDMI matrices, which are more appropriate and they're more reliable. I've been using this brand for a little over a year now by TestSmart. In fact, I liked it so much, I needed a KVM switch, and I also bought a KVM switch from the same company. They make them in different sizes. Mine's a 4x4 that supports up to 4K 60. They also make an 8x8 and a 16x16. Cool thing about them is there is no need to manage EDID. It is all automatic and handle for you. I've had zero issues with this one. Comes with a remote control rack, standard 19-inch rack, 1U space. It also has RS-232 for control, and also it does accept TCP/IP commands, and there's also a BFocus companion plugin which will work to control these things. So I've had very good experiences with this particular brand for doing all sorts of routing.
And I've used an HDMI trip-light splitter for a long time. It's active, it's powered, and I've had no problems with it at all for about 3 years now. So just another option for you. I did want to mention the fact that if you want to get your questions in, don't forget that we have our QR code. Excuse me, I hit the wrong button there. Our QR code, I'm going to put up in the corner of the screen there. If you want to take a picture of that or anything else, if you're not in the system for office hours, that QR code gets you right to askofficehours.global, and you can get your questions in directly. A lot of the questions that we've been answering today came from this QR code. So if you want to be a little more a part of the show, use this. We're going to sneak to the next question.
This one's from Paul Vahus in Austin, Texas. What's the most universally used quick disconnect for camera, lights, and microphones?
Courtney Gooden's going to help us out. Courtney?
I don't know about lights, but for microphones, usually the Atlas quick disconnect, if you're talking about microphone stands, Atlas makes a quick disconnect lock-on adapter that you can easily use. As far as cameras go, and one here, the Touch and Go, which is, I think it was originally came from O'Connor, or I can't remember whether it was Sackler or O'Connor invented this, but I think the patents have lapsed on them. And this is what we use in Hollywood. Anything that has a 3/8" bolt in the bottom, so professional cameras pretty much use this Touch and Go plate. It's handy because with a big camera that you've got all rigged out, you can just you cock the receptacle plate on the top of the head, and then you just drop the camera onto it, and it automatically locks it in. And then you use that little lever that's at the backside back there to lock it firmly. The first lock keeps it from falling out of the connector, and the second lever over here wedges it in there so it has a tight fit and doesn't wobble at all. And that's the one I see most universally on top of almost all major camera heads, O'Connor, Sacklers, those type of larger heads.
Jonas Dottle.
I was just gonna say, there's these great screws that you can find. 3/4 inch. It's this weird thing for us Europeans, and most of the time for lights, you will have something that fits there, or the baby pin that you can slot it on. There's a lot of conversions as well, so like just carry a little bag with all the screw adapters that you would need. Rode makes a really nice little thing that you can attach to your backpack. And otherwise, whatever Courtney said, in the Hollywood world. But if you can't afford quick connects, screws it is.
Yeah, I don't think there's a universal. I use a lot of different things. I would say that nowadays cameras keep getting lighter, and I also have microphones and other things I want a quick release. I used a lot of the Manfrotto and Bogan kind of things, but I'm also going to put up this little center thing here, the small rig quick release. If you're getting into really small stuff, like you want something to mount your iPhone, I'm using a lot of those little hawk locks, and I got to tell you, they work really well for something super light. For microphones and things like that, on my stand, I always have one of these Ultimat quick releases. They're a little thing, but they're a little bit iffy if you're doing critical recording. I use them on a mic like this. There's one right here in my stand because I'm going to pull this TLM 103 off and put my Sennheiser MKH416 if I'm going to go do something else. Like I always have one of the back ends of these. I have one on my little travel mic stand. And it is a lot easier just to snap a mic on really quick and easy. So there's a lot of different things. I don't think there's one standard. There's a lot of equipment that I see out there, and you kind of pick the level of gear that you need to support and then find something that matches to that. That's my philosophy. Next question.
Next question is from Jacob. Good night in Indianapolis, Indiana. How would you approach creating a presenter readiness video designed to help corporate presenters look and sound their best? Are there specific resources you use for this purpose? Example, priority of internet audio, lighting, camera, and background.
Nigel Dessau, take us through your thoughts.
Well, there are no end of the great office hour shows that have discussed this in detail, and I've come up with a list similar to you. I find there are sort of 2 or 3 things I do when I'm talking to people. And it really depends on who you're talking to and the scenario they use. I try and do the pyramid that you just talked about and go through that with them. Sometimes I will send them to a YouTube video. I really like the Tom Buck one called Look and Sound Your Best on Zoom. It's 15 minutes long. If they're too impatient to watch that, you have a different problem. But the other thing that I do often is I talk to people about the 3 things that make you effective when you present: what you look like, what you sound like, and what you say. And I remind them that 70% is what you look like, so that's your internet and your camera and the lighting. About 23% is what you sound like, the importance of having a good microphone, and 7% is what you say. And I try to get them to encourage them not just to spend all their time on the 7% and miss the 93%.
Ronnie Hofsawi.
Yeah, the list is almost endless, but of course you can prioritize what is the most important. And if these are meetings taking place, for instance, in Zoom with an HD account, you probably would demand that the computer they are on a cabled Ethernet, not Wi-Fi. The other thing is the camera position and the angle. So normally you tend to have the camera in eye height, so that you don't have a Dutch angle which displays this person in a not very nice angle. Second is of course that you have the right size. So that it conforms with the rest of the production. The worst thing I see is when we don't do office hours is to see people's size of heads is very different, and if you try to mix and match that, it looks really, really bad. So have a conformity about that. Next thing is to have ear pieces so that you don't have a speaker live out in the room. This is handled differently between the different types of software. Teams does this kind of good. Zoom does it kind of good. So try to always have not an active speaker out in the room. Then you have the microphone. If there is a lot of room noise, it will be detrimental to the experience. So make sure you have a microphone that fits the room. If you have a good sounding or soundproofed room with less reflections, you can of course use probably most type of microphones. If you have a room like this, which is very reflective with windows, I have big displays, etc., I tend to use dynamic microphones like the Shure MV7s or similar. And of course, make sure the computer is powerful enough to be able to process the image that is being transmitted. So if you're going for a 1080 image, you probably need a little bit more than the smallest type of laptop that you have. And image-wise, of course, the easiest way to improve the image is to add light and make sure the light is coming from a little bit up and a little bit on the side, and try to prevent having reflections in glasses. We that use glasses is always something irritating. If I lift my head like this, you'll see the reflection from the lights, and if you're just looking at the camera, it's perfect. So yeah, that's a few of the things that we tend to focus on.
All sorts of good advice here. I will say that I think telepresence is going to be increasingly important for everybody who wants to do business anywhere, and that's one of the things we've been talking about forever. You know, once upon a time, how you dressed was mattered a lot when you showed up in a professional office space. I think when you remote in now, it's every bit as important. I agree entirely with Nigel's hierarchy, with the exception of this. If you're going to lose something for the pure communications content of a presentation, I would rather lose video than audio, only because audio does most of the heavy lifting. And so I always put a little more emphasis on that. It's not to say it's wrong. If you are going to be going on Zoom or something like that where people will be seeing you, 100% your presentation there visually is critically important. Keeping the junk out from behind you, being well lit so that you're not murky in the picture and things like that, all extremely critical. But I used to do a thing when I toured and doing lectures about video production. I would say, close your eyes to the audience, and I would give them a line, and then I would say, now open your eyes, and I would mouth the words of the next sentence. And I would say, you just got video without audio, and you just got audio without video. Which did you learn more from? And the point was that the spoken word typically carries more data to your audience than anything else. So I would balance those things depending on the environment you're working into. Nigel, do you wanted to come back in before we move on?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point. I'm testing currently the Elgato prompter. I think it works great. I think it's easy to use, and it has the advantage that you have to put some sort of camera behind it rather than use the camera on your laptop. And I think setting that up correct will drive some of the video experience that Ronnie and people were talking about. And it's really easy. It's a great solution.
Yeah, being able to throw notes up, even if you're not trying to read from the prompter, if you're just putting notes up to keep you on track and reminders of your next topic and things like that, hugely important. And I wouldn't want to do a Zoom call anymore without having that aid. Let's go to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael's asking, has anyone ever used plugins from dearVR to add depth to a stereo music recording?
Alexander Knight. Thoughts?
I haven't used this plugin. I personally don't really believe in them. I believe in working within the confines of, stereo audio is good for one specific thing, and then we do have immersive formats like Dolby Atmos and binaural audio and all that kind of stuff. So when it comes to creating depth, and if we're talking about music production, there are lots of things and techniques you can do, mainly starting with the room that you're choosing to record in. A lot of recording studios will have adjustable baffles and diffusion where you can add more absorption to deaden the sound in the room, or open them up and add more diffusion and have more liveliness. It's just at the warehouse studios, they have these adjustable baffles. Also miking techniques, adding various room mics to blend into the recording to give things a sense of space, working with processing like reverb and that type of thing to add a sense of space and depth. So there are lots of things that you can do. I just believe that, panning also makes a difference. There's lots of techniques you can work with within the confines of what stereo audio is really designed for. So there are tricks that these types of plugins can do with phase and stuff like that, but I generally am not a fan of it. I think that if you want immersive audio, you should really be mixing stuff bespokely in something like Dolby Atmos.
Jonas Dottle.
I've used it a little bit here and there. One, to play really funny pranks on your people in Zoom. Because dearVR has this one plugin that allows you to generate binaural audio, and it lets you put sounds wherever you want. So what I do is I take vMix, I put dearVR micro in there, and I have a knocking sound, and then I can put it right there behind people. And on a Zoom call like this, where everybody is on headphones, that works really, really well. You might have seen like 2 years ago, suddenly the whole panel going. So that is really fun. But on the other side, it's really cool that you can parameterize it as well. I did a couple tracks on YouTube. They're called 8D audio, where you have like music running around you and around you and around you. That is really cool you can do with them. So I think it has some niche applications, but you can do really cool experiences with it. They have an integration into I think it's Unity for like games, so like for broadcast, it could be a cool integration like that. Yeah. Nice.
I'm just going to know if I'm on a call with you anytime and something starts creaking behind me. It's Jonas. I'm fine. I did want to mention that we are a non-for-profit. If you would like to help in our mission here to help people by answering questions every single day, you can go to officehours.global/donate and help us out. We always appreciate it. Let's go to the next question.
David Brady in New York City, New York. Thoughts on TGL's Rover camera? Where can I get one?
Courtney Gooden.
Well, maybe you can buy it from TGL, because I think this is kind of a bespoke little rig. Look at it; it's got this little kind of a model car.
Oh, it's so cute! It's like a tiny Fisher dolly.
Look at all it has. It has a electrically operated pantograph that can raise and lower the camera. And then it's got pan, tilt, zoom, and roll, because it can roll around the axis, so you can do 360 degrees flips of the lens across the nodal point of the lens. This is a nodal point head, so the tilt happens right here at the nodal point, and the and the roll is at the nodal point. So my main criticism is they've got it showing rolling around on artificial turf. I think with the size of these wheels down here, it might be a little rough. So I think you're going to definitely have to have some type of optical image stabilization in there to get over the bumpiness.
Looks like they're shooting the Westminster Dog Show. That's the carpet you see in
but
dog
I think
shows.
This is a bespoke. I don't know of anyone who puts this out there. Maybe some specialized camera mount people that put this together for them. So
it's how you shoot Wobot Wars. It's not going to last 5 minutes in Robot Wars, but very nice. Thank you for showing us that. Next question.
Paul Vahus in Austin, Texas. Would Airtable with Google Drive serve as a good database for production gear?
Ronnie Hossoy, what do you think?
Yeah, it can. We have been using that a few years back. Nowadays, we're using something called Current RMS, or you can use something like Rentman, which is software that is actually made for these tasks. So if you would like to roll your own solutions, you can use that with Airtable. Regarding Airtable, we stopped using that for some time back and went with Notion, which has a lot of the same things you can do. All these tools are really similar. So for our production planning, pre-planning, and project management, we tend to use Notion as a tool where we can share and distribute information between all those roles that are involved in the project. And for the rental itself, for all the equipment we have out on the road, we use current RMS.
Next question.
Saxtal Smith in Chautauqua, New York. I'm designing a package for the houses of worship that want to live stream content on a budget. Looking at having 3 different versions at different price points, what does the panel recommend for this project?
Jonas Stottle's going to help you. Jonas?
So there are 3 components that you need. You need a camera, you need a way to get audio, and you need a way to send that to a CDN or YouTube. Camera-wise, at my church, we started in the pandemic with really cheap Panasonic G7s or G70 if you're not in the US. They're great. They work relatively well. You need a micro USB, micro HDMI to HDMI converter. You can get these little fake batteries, so they are constantly powered. Then you need to bring that into something. There is right now one of the encoders that I really like is the Magewell AIO. There's other encoders from Magewell that are also pretty good. So now we're talking, that is I think $800. There's also some that are cheaper. One thing to keep in mind is if it's a relatively modern church, you probably also will have a beamer projector, and you might need some lower thirds or some lyrics. Then we're talking about something bigger. Really, really keep in mind audio as well. How are you getting the audio in? Make sure that you have a quality preamp for that. I really like to also have some atmospheric mics, because that way if you have any issues with your normal mics, you still hear it. Then kind of a step up where you can add a lot of things is Magewell Director. The reason why I like this one over other solutions that you might see, the OpSpot Talent is OEM version of this, or the YOLO boxes. I've seen a lot of great features that they added. This even allows you to get an HDMI output. You can use cell phones. You can use cameras. Upgrade-wise for the camera, if you want a standard shot that just is a wide, the Blackmagic Studio Pocket G2 is probably the cheapest 12G SDI camera you can get, around $1,000. Keep in mind, also, like, don't just get a cheap lens, but this is really nice. And what's neat is you can also, you have an HDMI output, you have an SDI output, and over USB-C, you can use it with an Ethernet connector as well. That way you get control over it. There's a couple really cool tools for that. But also keep in mind, does it need to be live? Like sometimes you can also like release it later. That being said, at some point you probably end up, at least with an ATEM Mini Pro, that way you can switch between the different looks. But if you need something that's really contained and automated, which sometimes the volunteer situation is really the problem that you're fighting, like how many people do you have? Then PT sets come in. I would at that point just switch to a Ross Carbonite Ultra 60 that has 60 inputs and get all the broadcast cameras that you want in like the crazy level. A little bit below that is probably a Blackmagic Television Studio, which is a good combination of inputs. At my church, we then use HDR Graphics, Playout B, and Songbeamer for our lyrics. So that all integrates well. One tip I will give you, if you use a Blackmagic device, you might want to also get a laptop with that you can run OBS on to stream. Because depending on your network, Blackmagic sometimes has issues with the TCP stack streaming to YouTube. But yeah, the cheapest is probably you get a cell phone, lyrics broadcaster. Some of those broadcasting apps now also have HTML overlay, so you could have a laptop with HDR graphics or something on it as well, and then stream it, but really, really focus on your audio. If you don't have a good existing audio setup, I really like the way of like getting a stereo mic and then piping that in as an atmospheric mic. But
Ronnie Hopsoy,
you can always scale out.
Oh. Ronnie?
Yeah, I would just refer to the sister channel of Office Hours, which is called Extra Hours. The broadcast they had the 14th, I think, is discussing different types of packages from the cheapest one to a little bit more expensive one. So take a look at that broadcast and you will get some more info on this.
Very, very nice. Thank you all for watching today. We appreciate your being a part of the Office Hours family, and our specific thanks to everyone who shows up as a producer here. That's all of you who ask questions and put them into the system, whether you do it through Makana or through the QR code. You drive the show, and we appreciate your contributions every single day. To the panelists who bring, as you saw today, incredible experience and technical chops into the show, answer your questions live on the air. We could not do this show without the brain trust that is our fabulous panelists. And to the back-end crew, those silent people who, if you stick around for just a minute and watch the credit roll at the end of the show, you'll see a lot of names there. It takes a lot of people to put on a show like this, and the back-end crew is amazing, keeping us all on track for the shows. We'll be back tomorrow doing this again. The Talak Traversal today, 17,000 miles is how far we would have had to travel if we were going to each of our experts who have come in today and talked to each of the people who put in questions. That is 28,000 kilometers and 138 million bananas for scale. We'll see you tomorrow.
David Brady, if you're listening, I found out who makes that camera support. It's Agito.
Agito? No, that's different.
Now, Agito.
Nice.
That
and they have a track
amazing.
wheel version. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thanks. See ya.
Betray you.
Ronnie, are you going to ISE in about 2 weeks, 3 weeks?
Yeah, that's the plan. We have some project that we need to do. I'm not sure how to handle both of these at the same
You guys
time.
taking iPhones, and can you come in live?
Yeah, we can.
Maybe
We'll see.
That's the
hop
plan.
in. Love to see you and look around the show.
Oh, it's so big. And it's the first time at the ISE, so it will be overwhelming.
Yeah, but it's great and easier to traverse. I've been collecting all my equipment for that, and we'll see.
So you are going. Where are you staying? You're staying in the center.